Bill, I'm starting to think you're on Matt Campbell's payroll because you've got
Disrespect.
you've got Iowa State projected to finish 8th
Yeah.
in the Big 12 after, expectations were so high going into the season last year. To me, they were the most disappointing team in the entire country, but I feel like low expectations it is kind of right where Matt Campbell wants the program in a weird way. So, what are you thinking about Iowa State heading into the year?
I felt so bad for them last year because, I can easily point out, close losses. They're pretty random, and obviously they had a ton of those. They lost by 10 to Iowa, but obviously if they just have 2 turnovers, then that game looks a lot different. Lost by 2 to Baylor, 7 to West Virginia, 3 to Tech, and 7 to Oklahoma, 7 to Clemson, where poor Brock Purdy runs for a first down and then fumbles it back across the line at the end of the game.
Yeah, I was going to say that earlier whenever you were talking about Adrian Martinez.
Yeah.
And how they're just kind of Brock Purdy may be the one exception. It doesn't appear to be random with Brock Purdy.
Yeah, and I felt bad because they were so close to being what they were supposed to be last year, and they weren't. And then they lost Purdy, and they lost Hall, and they lost a ton on the offensive and defensive lines get thinned out a whole bunch. Lost just about every defensive back, and so it was. I can say that, close games, they'll average out over time. Iowa State will bounce back next year, and then they just get destroyed from a returning production standpoint, and it looks like they're starting over. So, yeah, it is going to, obviously the easy answer is, if Hunter Deckers is good, they'll be fine. But that kind of seems like the situation. They are projected to fall to 59th offensively from 34th. They're projected, again, because defensive back production matters so much, they're projected to fall from 19th to 57th on defense. I don't see John Haycock Field in the number 57 defense ever. I assume they're going to be better than that. But yeah, the offense, do they have a reliable run game to lean on without Hall? Do they have, as sketchy as Purdy was late in games, he was also very good for large percentages of games, 72% completion and all that. So it's just so hard. You're making such an assumption of Matt Campbell's abilities to put them high in the league. And maybe he deserves those assumptions. Maybe they're going to be just fine. It's hard. I struggle with them this year. It feels like we're talking up all these other teams. Somebody has to lose games, and they're going to be less experienced than a lot of teams in the conference.
I guess my thing with Iowa State is, do you assume that Matt Campbell just lucked upon a great group of guys that happened to all come up and play together?
Right.
Or do you believe in the fact that they've done a great job developing, low-level recruits and have built that into their program? And if that's what you think, you should expect some new names to step in,
right,
and play well. And there's still a couple of really good players on their team. Xavier Hutchinson has the potential to be, maybe the best receiver in the conference if he gets the other part of the formula with the quarterback good, and they can take advantage of his size and skill. But they've still got elite players there, a handful of them.
Yeah, and you figure, with a lot of developmental programs with like Iowa State, like Kansas State, especially in Snyder's second tenure, it's kind of a cycle thing, right? Like you peak when you got a bunch of seniors, then you fall back to just to 6, 7, 8 wins, and then you push forward again when the new guys are experienced. It isn't hard to see that kind of thing going here. I do figure they'll bowl. I do figure their defense is going to be better than projected, and that should be enough to get them to 6, 7 wins. And then, next year at this time, you're looking at, if Deckers is the guy, or even if he isn't, whoever wins the job is probably coming back in 2023. Whoever wins the running back job is coming back. Most of, you're going to lose Hutchinson, but there are plenty of young guys who are going to see the field at receiver this year. So, yeah, I would say, I guess maybe it just says something in general that this is Iowa State we're talking about, and they're among the lowest teams in the country in terms of return to production, and they're projected 56th, not 100th or whatever, they would have been 10 years ago. Yeah. That maybe says something in and of itself, but yeah, it's going to be tricky this year for them, and they're going to be in a lot of close games, and they're going to have to, with a younger team, they're going to have to figure out how to win those close games this time around when they couldn't last year.
you've got West Virginia projected to finish 9th, and Kansas bringing it up the rear projected to finish 10th. When you look at those two teams, what are kind of the most interesting storylines for them heading into the year?
Every summer I step back and it weirds me out with Neil Brown at West Virginia that, like, we're always talking about, like, if the offense improves, he's Mr. Air Raid, right? Like, he was, coached by Hal Mummy and has all this experience and was a good coordinator. And since he's been a head coach at both Troy and West Virginia, I don't think he's had, I don't remember where the line was in the piece. I don't think he's had like a top 70 offense per SP plus, but his defenses have been consistently very good. Not really how that's supposed to work. But their offense has been the problem. The defense is going to need some help. The reason they're projected so low is that they did get hit really hard by defensive attrition. They brought in transfers, but not necessarily transfers that have produced at G5 schools or P5 schools. So he's asking a lot of really young guys defensively. Offense is going to have to step up, and it hasn't for him yet. Now, Graham Harrell, JT Daniels, he made some very intriguing moves. He's got experience at the receiver position with Ford Wheaton and Sam James. I like Sam James is one of those guys, like, every time I watch them play, I'm like, I like that guy. And then at the end of the season, his stats just aren't
just don't look at the drop rate for Sam James.
Right, exactly.
And then you like him a lot.
On my little spreadsheet, his drop rate is in deep red, which is a problem.
Oh boy.
But what, 7%? So
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that's all it is. If Harrell and Daniels mean suddenly they have a competent, solid offense, then I mean they should at least bowl. But again, if we're looking at, somebody's got to lose, they're projected, they're favorites in 2 games per SP plus this year, Kansas and Towson. Lots of toss-ups in there, but they're not actually favored in anything outside of those 2 games. And that's a problem. That's going to be a problem. I mean, I really like Neil Brown. He did a great job at Troy. I thought this would work out a lot, but I mean, you figure he's going to need to at least get to 6 wins this year.
What do you think about JT Daniels? I don't understand the hype. I never really have. Outside of maybe like 2 or 3 games in his career, he, number one, he doesn't stay on the field.
Right. Well, that's
been injured a bunch. I think he's got a good arm and can make some big plays, but seems inconsistent and always chasing those expectations. What do the numbers say about JT Daniels?
Yeah, I mean, it liked that as a true freshman in 18, his numbers were fine, which for a true freshman, they were good at USC in 18. But then, I mean, the biggest issue is he's a 5th-year senior. We still don't really know him. And it's crazy to say that, but obviously, he plays 1 game in 2019. He is still hurt for most of 2020. He looked spectacular at the end of 2020. Like, absolutely, this is what Georgia's offense was always supposed to be, almost 70% completion rate, using the entire field. Because that's the one thing, like, when he's healthy and he's as rare as that it is, you can throw all the vertical routes, you can throw all sideline to sideline, you can use everything, and that helps your run game and so many other things. But then, he starts 2021 against one of the best defenses in the country and doesn't look all that great. Then he's hurt. Then he sort of comes back, but he's still hurt. And then he's hurt more. And, eventually it wasn't worth bringing him back because they were, Stetson Bennett had matured a little bit more than he was in 2020. So it's crazy to say for a 5th-year senior that I don't know what I think about him. Mm-hmm. I know his arm's awesome. And maybe with Harrell, we saw he was like 25 for 34 in his 1 game with Harrell in 2019. Maybe that was a sign that that's a perfect marriage, but I don't see how, no matter how good you think he is or isn't, Garrett Green, Crowder, et cetera, the other quarterback's still going to have to be ready because, this guy hasn't played 12 games since his freshman year.
Should Kansas fans be excited? Is there hope, Bill? This last one, we'll let you go. Is there hope?
Define hope. Like, are they going to bowl this year? Probably not.
4 games? I think 4 wins would be, that'd be a big accomplishment, right?
Right. It'd be the first time in a while. That's for sure. No, their schedule's the obstacle here. I think they're absolutely going to be better. Offensively, they're going to be downright solid, I think. They're projected 88th, but that's not taking into account that Jalen Daniels really took the offense to a different place the last, whatever that was, 3 or 4 games. I think with him, with Devin Neal healthy, Kai Thomas from Minnesota is good. They're going to be able to do what they want offensively, and they're going to have some games where it really comes together nicely. Defense was so bad and so devoid of talent last year. Like Borland, the defensive coordinator, they're pretty straightforward defensively. And once they get that developmental thing going, Lonnie Phelps from Miami, Ohio is good at defensive end. I just don't think they're going to have nearly enough talent yet. And that's probably going to cost them constantly in Big 12 play. I think they can beat Duke. I think they can beat Tennessee Tech. I think they can absolutely pull a couple of upsets, but that's still only going to get them to like 4 wins, which for Kansas is obviously a step forward, but it's still not a hope. I don't think we're going to see a bowl run by any means. And I love Lance Leipold, and I don't see that.
I think Jalen Daniels may be he probably is the most underrated player in all of college football. And the reason I say that is because he does some really nice things, but 90% of plays, he's running for his life.
Yeah.
Like not even offensive line, not getting in the way at all. Doesn't even have time to set up and even get his eyes downfield before everything's pouring in on top of him. Is the offensive line going to be good enough to just give him an instant to try and make a play?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I think run blocking, I think they've got a potential for a really nice line. I can't pass blocking. It's hard to tell. Like, I really like Earl Bostic Jr. Nowitzki, the Buffalo transfer at center. He was like honorable mention all conference. They have those guys, but they had him last year and it didn't really result in a good line. So it's going to be those sophomores. You got a couple more transfers. It's an extremely young line still outside of Nowitzki and Bostic. So you do figure that's going to hold them back at times. But yeah, like Daniels, this is the smallest of samples, but I looked at like total QBR after November 1st last year, just down the stretch of the season. He was like 21st in total QBR last year as a sophomore running for his life. And so I do think, even though that was a small sample, I think the potential is obvious, especially with a much more experienced receiving corps. It's all freshmen and sophomores aside from Lassiter last year. So I think if the offensive line is just fine, competent, outside of those 2 guys, then they've got a lot of offensive potential.